He has been jailed and persecuted for some of the work that he's done in one organization called the Association for Comprehensive Rural Assistance. Also has a master's degree in theology from Wheaton College in Wheaton, Illinois, USA. I could read the whole thing, but I think you'll find this posted elsewhere. He has a number of publications to his name. One early book that caught my attention is called Truth and Social Reform, which I would love to hear more about, and I actually invited him to lecture on that today, but he chose today's topic instead, which I think means it's fresher and more pertinent to what he wants to bring to our attention this week. Some of his more recent works, The Open Wounds of Islam, he's explored how the Christian faith interacts with and deals with both Islam and Hinduism. At other times, he has very deep insights into the way in which nations develop politically. And perhaps we'll hear more about some of the things that he shared with us earlier about deep concerns that he has for the way the political situation is developing in his own country, India, as well as transferring those insights to places like Uganda and elsewhere. Today, he's asked to address us on this topic, trends in gender policy, sexuality, and family. I think when I first put that before him, I said global trends. Somehow the global got dropped, but we'll see how he handles it. And he's expressed the Indian perspective, but I can tell you he's a world Christian. He's been everywhere. He's traveled, he's thought and interacted with so many others. He was discussing with us earlier, because we were saying that one of the purposes of APC is not only to research, but to do applied research, research that is applicable in the public square. And he gave us the name of what he calls applied theology. And I think that's the realm in which he works. So let me ask you to give a warm welcome to our speaker today, Vishal Mangalwadi.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you very much for that warm welcome and introduction. My wife has an MA in theology from Wheaton, not me.
Oh, okay, excuse me.
But I married her so that my theology might be checked and corrected. She is an Indian from North India. It is actually global trends in gender policy. Because Africa is being invaded from the West, and there is a war for the soul of Africa. Or there will be many policy issues which will not be about the soul of Africa, but this is about the soul of a nation of Africa, because ruled in England that a Christian doctor, David McCareth, was dismissed from National Health Services. In England, they have a National Health Services. He was assigned to the Department of Works and Pensions. So people who need pensions for whatever reason come to him for medical assessment. And a gentleman, 6 feet tall, bearded, came to him and demanded that Dr. David call him madam. So the doctor said that I've been working in this field as a physician for 30 years, and gentleman, a madam. The patient took it as an insult, filed a case against the doctor, and the National Health Services fired him, dismissed him he lost his job. He appealed. This happened in July. The appeal was rejected, and in fact, the judge ruled that the doctor has testified that it is his biblical conscience, his conscience shaped by the Bible, that would not allow him to call a man a madam. So the judge ruled that his biblical faith is incompatible with human dignity. He is violating the dignity of this woman, who is a transgender, in her mind, his mind. And the doctor ought to respect it. And the modern policy of transgenderism must supersede his biblical prejudices, biases, vocabulary, worldview, etc. Now, this is a British case, but it has direct bearing on Uganda. One of the professors in Uganda was engaged by a UN-related agency to write a course on teaching Ugandan students respect for the confused Western genderism, LGBTQ, the lesbians and gays and bisexuals, transgenders, queer, etc., then how to teach Ugandan students. So she said, I'm afraid that this will not be accepted in Uganda, but I can certainly write a curriculum to teach students to respect, to love their neighbors who are confused about their sexual identity. So there are lots of people who are genuinely confused about their sexual identity, whether for biological reasons or psychological reasons or cultural reasons. And God loves them, and therefore we must teach our people to love and respect those you might disagree with very strongly, but you love the person, not their ideas, not their vocabulary, not their worldview necessarily. So she was hired and asked to submit a proposal, including the budget of what would it cost to create the curriculum, translate the curriculum, and promote the curriculum throughout Uganda. She submitted a budget of $8,000 US, and this African officer of UN related agency, she said that this looks very good. We have a deal, but just inflate the budget to $20,000 US. You will get your 8,000, I will get 12,000. You do the work. People who don't believe in dualism of male and female, they don't believe in dualism of good and evil. Then I'm not doing any work, but I'm giving you 8,000, you give me 12. So here are international forces that have rejected not only the Bible's idea of male and female, but the Bible's idea of good and evil, who are seeking to use educational machinery of the state to capture the soul and bring all of their confusion or their corruption into Africa. So this is global African trends in gender policy, sexuality, and family seen through Indian eyes. Why? Because the West is confused today, heading into the darkness, but that confusion comes from India, as I will show in a few minutes. So the source of current sexual confusion is Carl Jung, the psychoanalyst from Basel, follower of Freud, Sigmund Freud, who came to India in the winter of 1936-37. And that is the beginning. He's the grandfather of the New Age movement, which is the real source of the intellectual confusion. So when we are looking at a policy issue, we are looking at it philosophically, theologically, and its practical implications. What is this battle all about? You are seeking to build Uganda as a great nation, to have the nation seek truth, to be built upon truth. And that's what we are looking at. So quite a bit of the discussion would be philosophical, some of it technological, and it will be, you have to shape the policy or fight specific policy battle based with that understanding of a holistic, integrated perspective on the issues of gender and sexuality and family. So we will not be able to finish everything today. Some of it we'll continue in the discussion of parenting in crisis, in the public lecture on Wednesday. But what exactly is happening to a person who is biologically male, but he demands that he should be addressed as a female because he feels he is a woman? So what's happening? What is maleness? What is femaleness? This is the question. Now, I'd like to use a very simple analogy to help you understand the philosophical depths of the problem. It's a profound problem which also originates with Buddhism, but right now it is sweeping Europe and increasingly America. The question is raised in Psalm 8, verse 4. What is man that you are mindful of him? You've created all of this wonderful universe with stars and galaxies and constellations, but you are mindful of him. You care for him. You have placed everything under his feet and authority. You've made man ruler over everything that you have created. That's the could have said that you love man so much that you sent your son to shed his blood for this man. What is man that you care so much for him that you will send your son to die for these sinful rebels, confused, lost people? So man is very important. So the phrase dignity of man, which the British court used in firing a man who is seeking to live by his conscience according to the biblical view that God made man in his image, male and female, the court said that his biblical perspective violates the dignity of human beings. But in fact, the phrase dignity, the word dignity, comes from the Latin translation of that Psalm 8, that you have bestowed upon him dignitas, honor, glory, dignity. God has bestowed upon him. Other than that, there really is no foundation for human dignity, as we will see in a few minutes. So let's begin with a simple illustration, because what I want to give you a short course in Western philosophy and Indian philosophy, which is at the root of the confusion, darkness, lostness. So imagine in London, you have a very senior officer in a company. He has had a very nasty divorce. Because as you know, that human intellect is simply incapable of keeping two lovers together. The French revolutionaries didn't think so. The whole of the Enlightenment didn't think so. They trusted human reason. But now everybody knows that human intellect is incapable of keeping two lovers together, let alone keeping a nation together, such as England. It's already splintered into many. Their parliamentarians is splintered. Parties are irrelevant. Ideas into many groups. And in human intellect is incapable of keeping Democrats and Republicans together in America. America is at an intellectual civil war. When it will translate into actual war and become like Uganda, we don't know. You've had 9 elections since 1962, not 9 elections, 9 changes of power, transition of power, not a single one of them peaceful. Everyone through coup, through violence. And America is getting there. You're just ahead of America. But for now, the confidence that human mind can keep two lovers together is being shown that the secular marriage, even when it is marriage of two believers, two Christians, two evangelicals, it doesn't actually work. Because marriage is not evolutionary idea. It's not a biological idea. It's a supernatural idea, and it takes supernatural grace, humility, repentance, forgiveness, for its survival. If you lean only on your own understanding, you can't survive. You have to ask for wisdom from above. Anyway, so this gentleman has had a terrible divorce. And then after several years, he begins to date another woman who really loves him, likes him, and he's attracted to her, and he gets married again. And then a few months later, they start fighting and have another terrible divorce. So he decides he's female because the Chinese are manufacturing really good Roxys, because they can produce one just to suit exactly what kind of hairstyle and eyelashes and body and skin color and size that you want. So they can tailor make a female just for you. So he orders one, and he decides this time I'm not going to go for formal marriage because legally it's not required that I have a wedding ceremony with my new life partner. So I will actually have a small party at home Friday evening, invite a few friends, and since he doesn't have a wife, food will have to be ordered from outside. So a caterer will come and set up the food while all his friends, all men, come after work to celebrate his third marriage. Well, as everybody is on their way, he gets a phone call from his boss that a mega multi-million dollar project, a multi-million pound project has just come from China. I need you in the office because this cannot wait for the weekend. So please turn back, come, we should make a decision. So he has to turn around and he calls his friends and tell him that I'm sorry, I have to go, but the food is there, wine is there, please go in, have a party, I won't be with you. So now on his own wedding night, he has to turn around and work. And it becomes very clear that he will not be back home before midnight. So he tells them, sorry, you guys lock the house and go. So while they are eating and drinking, and they get a little bit too drunk, they decide that since the bridegroom hasn't come, let's at least look at the bride. So they open the box, and she is beautiful, stunning. Without clothes, of course, but clothes are there. She is very beautiful. And they decide to turn her on because the batteries are fully charged. And she begins to talk, and she's extremely seductive, better than any wife, and attractive. So they said, well, we might as well initiate her. Why should she have to be left alone because the boss has taken hold of her husband? So they go ahead and initiate her. The question, can she sue them, file a police case that she has been raped? Is she raped? Because they haven't bought her, they are not married to her. Have they violated her dignity? You're policymakers. What do you think? No. Why not?
Because she's not a natural human being.
Sorry?
Because she's not a natural human being.
She's not a natural human being. So the word natural is the important one. She's an artificial human being. Well, she has artificial intelligence today. She can play chess and beat you. She can translate hundreds of languages. She has entire Wikipedia. So any question you ask, she can tell you. She can pass any exam with this mathematics. A person, a human being, a soul or self. And you are saying she's not. Well, Saudi Arabia happens to be the first there's a bill pending in European Parliament right now that robots should be recognized as persons. Yes, today she has artificial intelligence, but what if 100 years from now she has biointelligence? Is she a person?
She can't be a person because one, she doesn't have that innate intellect that God created. And then God has created man in his own image. And he said, man has been wonderfully made.
So what God created is person, what man creates is not. But every university in America, England, all over the world is saying that God never created human beings. We evolved in the northern jungles of Uganda from the apes who are still there. That's what they're teaching. Ugandans may not believe that, but everybody thinks Uganda is where all of us came from. So the question, what is a person? You are saying that God breathed his breath, his soul, his spirit into Adam, and he became a living soul. He is a person made in God's own likeness. A machine can be very sophisticated, can do things, run much faster than I can, and have a lot more strength than I do. But just because they are faster, stronger, can solve mathematical problems much faster and much bigger problems. A machine is, you are saying, is not a person, because machines produce, we create. There's a choice involved. And we create what we choose to create. Even photography is a creative art. That photographer is making a decision about the angle, the light, the size, etc. So we are creative creatures made in the image of the Creator. Machines are productive creation. They can produce things much better, much faster, much neater than we can. But machines are not made in the Creator's image as a living soul. Now, this is a philosophical, theological perspective which is informing your policy. You're in a government, you're making policy decisions about what will our children study, students study about gender and family, sexuality, etc. And but as a policymaker, you are bringing your theology, as are they. So let's pursue this a little bit more. Suppose Roxy looks like a woman, talks like a woman, she has all the female organs, but you take her feminine chip out of her memory and insert a masculine chip. She begins to talk like a man. Say, I'm man. I'm Roxwell, not Roxy. And etc. So is she a male or a female? Now that she's in all her conversation, I believe, her talk, she is talking as a male. Is she a female or a male? Body is female, but she, whatever that means, or it, is she a male or a female? Sorry?
She's none of them.
She's transgender. So suppose you remove the masculine chip and insert a cat chip. Now she's a cat woman. She meows like a cat, she scratches like a cat, she bites like a cat, and she wants to be purred like a cat, etc. So is she a human being or a cat?
She becomes a cat because I think we are, because of the content, not the shape or the frame.
Okay, so someone created the chip and implanted it in your body, and your culture, your parents, your teachers, your friends, they implanted a male chip in your brain. So you talk of yourself as a male, talk of yourself as a female, feel as a male. That your maleness and femaleness is a cultural construct, a linguistic construct. That is, in fact, what postmodern philosophers, Jacques Derrida, Michel Foucault, etc., they are saying that your gender identity is a linguistic construct, but in fact they are going much deeper, that your idea of self, personhood, that you're not a machine, you're a person, you're not a robot, which the robot does not have. That's what you're saying. Now that's a philosophical idea. Can you prove that you are a person, a self, a soul? What is soul? So the heart of the problem of the darkness and confusion of the West is not gender. Is it male or a female? The confusion is much deeper, metaphysical, philosophical. Is a human being a person, a self, a soul, a permanent entity, an immortal entity, valuable, with dignity? Where does this idea of dignity come from? Universities, Macquarie University, everybody else. It begins with René Descartes. Rationalist philosophy, the age of reason. The phrase was coined by Thomas Paine later, but the reality was born with Descartes' dictum. Descartes says, I doubt that God exists. The sage enlightenment thinker thinks that the world is an illusion. I doubt that you exist. Actually, I'm in bed dreaming. So you don't really exist except in my dream. I doubt that I exist. Is that possible? Is it logical? No. The first 3 or 4 are logical statements. I doubt God exists, world exists, you exist. But when I say I doubt that I exist, Descartes says that is contradiction in terms. That cannot be true. My skepticism cannot be true at that point, because when I say I doubt I exist, I am thinking that I may not exist. I am thinking means that I exist. So his first dictum is, I think, therefore I am. I think, therefore I am. The philosophers who follow him, such as Scottish philosopher David Hume, he says, wait a minute, no. You think you're being rigorous, mathematical in your philosophy and logic, but actually you're quite confused. You have made a basic logical fallacy. What you have proven is that doubt exists, thinking exists. You have not proven that the doubter, the thinker exists, because in order to prove that the thinker, you, the self, the soul, exists, you have to first prove causation, right? That every effect has to have a cause. So I'm doubting. That fact of doubting has to have a cause, a doubter, a thinker. You have to first prove causation for your logic to be complete, but there is no way human logic can prove causation. Why? Very simple. An atheist has to believe that the universe has always existed. Or, once upon a time, the universe didn't exist. There was no God, no soul, no spirit, no angels, no demons, no energy, no matter. Out of a big bang, for no reason, no cause, the whole universe came into existence. So if the universe can exist without a cause, either as an eternal entity or as an entity that begins with a big bang. If the universe can exist without a cause, why can't thinking exist without a cause? Why can't doubting exist without a cause? So, yes, doubting proves is that doubting exists, not that the doubter exists as a soul, as a self, as a person, as an immortal, precious entity. All knowledge, Hume says, comes to us through our eyes and ears and nose and touch and smell and taste. That's called empiricism. That empirical experiences give us the information that the brain processes and turns into knowledge. But unfortunately, I cannot see your soul, and I cannot touch your soul, and I cannot hear your soul, and I cannot smell or taste your soul. So I have no empirical way of knowing that you exist as a soul. I can touch a Roxy, and I can touch you. Body exists, yes. Matter exists, physics and chemistry exist. But the soul exists can neither be proven through logic nor through empirical experience. So Western philosophers tried for centuries to get away from this dilemma that how do you know that you exist as a soul? What makes you different from a Roxy? That you are a permanent, precious, immortal soul. How do I know that? I have no way of knowing it. So, now this is extremely important as you participate in policy decisions, because those UN officers are interested in $12,000. Let the culture go to hell. They are not really interested in truth. They are being bullied by the devil because there really is an evil supernatural force that wants to rule this world. Why is it that Uganda cannot have a civilized transition of power? That you cannot have political and bureaucratic leadership which is corruption-free? Well, this is because a devil really exists and he really wants to rule this world. Evil exists. You experience it. How to fight it is part of what the Your Policy Institute is all about, but we are sticking with the gender confusion and its relationship to sexuality and family, because when we come to Wednesday talking about parenting, why is abortion something for which 12 presidential candidates in America today will fight for, including women, Elizabeth Warren or Kamala Harris or others, that we must defend the right to abort babies because the baby has no soul, even after the baby is born. What is soul? If your soul, yourself, is a cultural linguistic construct, then the child has not yet developed an identity of self. That is why if you can kill a chicken and sell chicken part, and you're in Uganda, so you are safe, you can even kill cows and sell cow meat and cow parts. Why just abort a baby? Why not cut up the baby and sell baby's body parts? A lot of people will buy it, including within America. All the research labs will buy the baby parts. So abortion clinics, Planned Parenthood, were doing that until a few months ago when they were exposed in There was a big hue and cry. How could they degenerate to that point? Because their philosophical worldview is very different than yours. They actually believe that no child is born as a human person. Personhood is the chip, male chip or female chip or cat chip, that language creates, your parents create, your physician, your class teachers, your friends. They create the chip that is implanted in you, accept. But why do you allow your parents and doctors and teachers to define who you are, whether you are a male or a female? Why should others define it? Why shouldn't you assert your right to define whether I'm a male or a female? That's the issue, right? You don't actually exist, but you must define yourself. So, as we begin to analyze, and you will have these fierce discussions as you become part of policy making teams, whether from bureaucratic angle or intellectual angle or political angle, when you are discussing that Satan wants to have the soul of Uganda, and you are having to fight for God's will to be done in Uganda, you have to understand that your opponents have been brainwashed by universities controlled by the devil. The highest, the best universities, much better funded and with much better teachers. But however, the devil has taken control of those universities, that you don't exist. You are an artificial construct of language, of culture. And you have the freedom to take control of your own life and say, no, until yesterday I was a female, from today I'm going to be male. Because I'm going to define who I am. I'm going to change the language and all the rules. Well, okay. This is exactly what the Buddha was teaching. Gautam Buddha, the Indian sage. This is where the Indian perspective becomes important. The main difference between Hinduism and Buddhism is that Hinduism said that spiritual realm, self, a soul, exists. Buddhism said self doesn't exist, soul doesn't exist. Body exists, yes, but there is no soul in Roxy. Therefore, Hinduism, particularly Buddhism right now, I'll come back to Hinduism if time permits, or if it doesn't permit, then you can discuss it during tea time. Let's stick to Buddhism for now, that'll be simpler. If soul does not actually exist, then there is no you. Therefore, Buddhism never discussed the issues of human rights and human dignity. These discussions, human rights, human dignity, human conscience, human freedom, all of these are part of Western philosophy, political thought, in as much as the West is debating biblical ideas. Western philosophy has to interact with the Bible because the church is so powerful, present everywhere. So you have to interact with the idea. So Descartes is saying, I exist as a soul, even if logically he hasn't proven that he exists. But intuitively he knows he exists. But what is intuition? I thought truth was logical, not intuitive. My wife and I have been married for 43 years, and that simply means that we've had plenty of time to fight. And when we have a very big fight, it goes on for a few days, few weeks, I give her 6 reasons why I'm right and she's wrong. And her ultimate response is that, look, I don't know, I can't argue with you because you're a better debater, but I know you're wrong. It takes me 10 years to realize she was actually right. And then I can give half a dozen reasons why she was right and I was wrong. She still can't give any reason. She does have an MA from Wheaton. So if she worked hard, she could come up with reasons, but why bother working hard when you know you're right? Well, my brain is hardwired, the left brain, to think mathematically, logically, evidence. Her brain is hardwired to be intuitive, imaginative. Why should my logic have superiority over her intuition? The problem is that sometimes my logic is wrong, sometimes her intuition is wrong, and sometimes we are both wrong at the same time. And then we need our 6-year-old granddaughter to tell us what is right. We can have an insight. But what is that insight? What is imagination? What is intuition? This takes the whole discussion to the realm of spirit. So I mentioned at the outset that the current gender confusion in America, globally, comes from India, and it begins with Carl Jung's visit to India in the winter of 1936-37. Jung is a follower of Nietzsche. Nietzsche, the German philosopher who declared God is dead, Western philosophy has killed God. Nietzsche is building, Freud is father of psychoanalysis in Vienna, which is in Austria, and he is building his psychology, worldview of psychology, on Nietzsche's atheism. Atheism doesn't mean God doesn't exist. Atheism means you don't exist. Because if God doesn't exist as a spirit, as a spiritual being, you can't exist as a spirit. You're just a biorobot, right? If God doesn't exist as a spiritual entity, you don't exist. You can't exist. And Nietzsche and all the atheists understood that it is not that God is dead, it is man is dead. There is no human being. Yes, Rox is there, but she could become Roxwell, or she can become a Catwoman or whatever. So, Freud is building his psychoanalysis on an atheistic worldview. What that means is very simple. It means that a family is bringing a patient to Freud, that this person has gone insane and we think he or she is demon possessed. Please do something to help her. So Freud obviously doesn't believe in demon possession because there is no God, there can't be any spirits. So what's wrong with this patient? Well, what is wrong is that when she was a little girl, she had a crush on her father, but the father was sleeping with the mother, so she had to repress her sexuality. Then she had a crush on her teacher, on her uncle, on her brother, but all of that had to be repressed. And this repression of sexuality had created psychosomatic problems, which we call demon possession. So demon possession is a biblical interpretation of a psychological disorder, which is actually rooted in sexual repression. That is the background of the sexual revolution, that students should not have separate dormitory for men and women. They should be able to live in the same dorms, and sex should not be repressed but should be expressed. And then everybody would be healthy, except that the families will be dead, but individuals will be healthy. But so down with family anyway, because it ends up in divorce in any case. So you have, this is what Freud is building his worldview, his understanding of psychology, which is behind the Kinsey report, which is behind the Hugh Hefner Playboy revolution. Playboy revolution by Hugh Hefner is the force that has destroyed biblical sexual ethic, biblical view of marriage, and created today's return to pagan Roman Hindu sexuality in the West, which is really the war against the biblical view of sexuality, family, gender, etc., that we are outlining. And some of it we may have to pursue during discussion because I really want to help us understand what is it that Carl Jung is seeing in India, and how is he taking the darkness from India into Basel and through there spreading all over the Western world, which is now coming and attacking you. Now, so Jung is Freud's prime disciple. He's the heir apparent of the psychoanalytic movement. Freud says to Jung, please, as you're going to be my successor, promise me that you will never give up sexual repression theory. This is the foundation of our whole system. So promise me that you will never give up this theory of sexual repression. Jung says, sir, the patient who was here on your couch today, do we really have hard scientific data that her sickness is caused by sexual repression? Are you imposing your theory upon her in explaining? Family says this person is demon possessed. You don't believe in spirits. You don't believe in demon. Do we have hard scientific data? And Freud is honest, no, we don't have hard scientific data, but we have to teach our theory as scientific dogma, as a bulwark. Bulwark against what? Bulwark against occult, against religion, because it is religion that is saying that this woman is demon possessed. That's religious interpretation, because the religion takes demons to be real. But in fact, we know that there are no demons. So there has to be an alternative scientific expression. So Roxy gets confused and gets mentally sick. But we won't go there. So let's say that once Jung realizes that Freud is imposing upon the scientific world, therapy world, a worldview which is a belief is not resting on solid scientific evidence. Jung says that actually Freud is occult. He's promoting a theory for which he has no proof. So they part company. Jung begins to explore the realm of spirit, self. His father was a minister, but he decides to look at how other cultures who were not influenced by the Bible, how they have understood these problems of human self. What is man? What is soul? What is spirit? What is person? What is self? And he goes to India because Hinduism had developed very sophisticated philosophies that everything is God, Brahma. There is a universal. Freud has talked about personal unconscious, conscious and subconscious mind. Jung takes it further down to collective unconsciousness. We actually all have one soul. There is only one soul. This is the ocean, infinite ocean of consciousness. We are all drops in the ocean. There are waves in the ocean, but those waves have no individual existence, identity. They are all part of the ocean. The individuality is an illusion. So this idea of Brahma, one universal collective consciousness, has profound implications. This is my last major point, so if you're waiting for tea, just bear with me for a few more minutes. Christian marriage presupposes a particular metaphysics, and that is that I am male, I'm finite, I'm not female. I need my wife to be complete. So Christian marriage presupposes my finiteness. I'm male, I'm not female, so I need my wife to be complete. It's not good for man to be alone, even if marriage is hard. Suppose this Christian worldview that I'm finite, I'm male, I'm not female is wrong. I'm actually infinite, I'm God, I'm Brahma. Then marriage is a hindrance to my enlightenment. That's why every Hindu, every Buddhist who wants to be enlightened has to renounce marriage. Mahatma Gandhi renounced his wife when he was in South Africa because he was seeking enlightenment. So every Hindu, every Buddhist, Buddha himself renounced his wife and his son when he was seeking enlightenment, because to remain married is to affirm your finiteness. But to seeking moksha, nirvana, salvation is to want to experience your infinity, that you are one with everything. So that raises a question. It brings us back to the subject. I experience myself as a male, my wife as a female. What is maleness? What is femaleness? Now imagine for a moment that all the liberal theologians and many American evangelical theologians are right, that Genesis 1 to 11 is stories. It's not history, it is stories. There are every evangelical university in America, practically every one, including Wheaton, has people who believe, has theologians, experts who believe that Genesis 1 to 11 is stories, not history. Is it a story that God created man in his image, male and female? That's what you said. God created man in his image, male and female. Is that history or is that a story? Imagine it's a story. Then you want scientific truth. And you raise a question, what exactly then is maleness and femaleness? Hindu metaphysics, which Buddhism accepted, and it may have pre-existed Hinduism in India, called Tantra. You've heard the word Tantra. Tantric idea, view of what is a human being, what is man, is very different than the biblical view. Tantric view, which is there both in Hinduism and Buddhism, is that because you're complete, you're not female, you're not male, maleness and femaleness is in every one of us, and this is what Carl Jung is learning. In every man, at the base of the spine, there is a psychic energy called Kundalini. Like serpent, when it is sleeping, it is coiled up. That's how Kundalini energy is always dormant. It's female energy, but it is there in every man. It is coiled up, it is dormant. Through meditation, yoga, particularly sexual meditation, which Mahatma Gandhi was practicing, you have to awaken your dormant female energy. When you awaken, there are 7 chakras, 7 psychic centers in human spine from the brain to the bottom. And this serpent, Kundalini energy is called serpent energy, female energy, Shakti. When it is awakened, it begins to rise up and goes through 5 chakras. And as it passes each chakra, the meditator has fantastic psychedelic, psychological, mind-blowing, mystical experiences. Ultimately, this Kundalini power, Kundalini serpent power, merges with the male energy, which is the crown chakra, Shiva chakra. So you have Shakti and Shiva, female and male. Both are within you because you are infinite. And you have to awaken your feminine energy to merge with your masculine male energy, Shakti and Shiva, merging into each other. That's when you become infinite. You realize you're God, you're Brahma, you're complete. You're both male and female. And beyond that, because this dualism of male and female is an evil, is delusion. It's your brain which imposes these categories of male and female, right and wrong, good and evil. World is not so divided because the world is one. There's only one God. God is everything. Everything is God. So this division, dualism of good and evil, male and female, right and wrong, this is all deception. This is the heart of tantric thought, both in Hinduism and Buddhism, which came to the West actually first with Swami Vivekananda in Chicago in 1893 in the first Parliament of World Religions. But he was very discreet, so he didn't talk very much about it in public. He was a tantric who had a homosexual relationship with his own guru, because once you are arousing your feminine energy, you want to experience being a woman, being a female in a sexual relationship. And but in the 1980s, 70s and 80s, when the West, particularly America, but all of Europe, had a lot more opened up to these ideas, because Carl Jung, when he brought these ideas, he gave them, not Hindu, Buddhist names, Shiva, Shakti, etc. He gave them scientific sounding names, anima and animus. All human beings have both female and male energies, which then the 20th century, towards the end of the 20th century, the confused scientists began to say, yes, of course, we have male and female have chromosomes. Every baby has same X and Y chromosomes, and as the baby begins to develop, it could go either towards maleness or towards femaleness predominating. So Jung begins that idea of everyone has male and female energy within him. You can use the word chromosomes, and you can use the terminology of X and Y, etc. And you have a whole new worldview being built which sounds scientific because it's using the language of chromosomes and it's using the language of evolution. But basically what it is doing is justifying tantric metaphysics, physiology. What is a man? Man is part of the universal self with male and female energies, both in every individual. All you need to do to Roxy is to take the masculine chip out and put in a female chip, or put a cat chip, and then you will have a cat woman or a male with female organs, female body. Now, this is a massive philosophical confusion. At the root of it is the simple fact that you cannot prove that you exist as a spiritual permanent entity, as an immortal soul. This is revealed. This is a revealed truth. So if whole of Western philosophy has failed to prove that you exist as a precious individual, permanent individual, so special that God would come to this earth and shed his blood for your salvation so that you may live immortally with him. This whole worldview is what the devil is out to destroy. So these little policy debates on which textbook will be used and what course will be used to educate children and students is just a very small part of Satan's grand narrative that you are actually God. You're not a finite male or a finite female. You are God. You are one with everything. You need to realize your own divinity. Don't allow your culture, your language, your parents, and your doctors to define who you are. You must say, I'm God, I'm going to define who I am, create myself. I began by saying that the court and the NHS, National Health Service in England, overruled the doctor's statement that I'm a Christian, I believe God created us male and female, therefore I have to live according to my conscience, and I cannot call a bearded man a madam. Now, what is conscience? You are a medical doctor in England, you have all the best machinery there. You take all the x-rays, all the ultrasound, all the MRIs, and all the scans, including CAT scan. Where do you think you will find conscience? In the head, or in the heart, or in the pancreas or lungs? Where is conscience? So you'll find a gland called conscience?
It occupies there.
Sorry?
That's why it occupies, that's why it sits in the head. Because
Which part of head has conscience?
the same part that emotions are.
And which is that part? Any science students here? Well, unfortunately, the health services have been looking at human body, every part of human body, and they haven't found anything called conscience. There is no organ in human body called conscience. Therefore, no atheist country in history has ever respected conscience or given the freedom of conscience to citizens. Conscience is part of biblical metaphysics. That is, biblical view of who is a human being. Human being made in God's image. So Roxy can actually sleep with 6 guys and her conscience wouldn't bother her. Because she doesn't have it's not part of, conscience is not a physical organ. It is an aspect of human soul made in God's image. Now, what this tells you about the policy is, conscience is part of the Bible. First and Second Timothy particularly talk about the necessity of keeping our conscience clean, pure, etc. What is a conscience? Now, it came as a big force in European history when Martin Luther said to the emperor, to the Pope, to the church, to the university, that I'm sorry, I'm not going to recant anything that I have written. I know you can kill me, but please do go ahead. My conscience is captive to the Word of God. What my book is expressing is what my conscience says. Now, should the state respect the conscience? Only if the state believes that you are actually made in God's image. So it took 100 years. 1521 was the Diet of Worms. Worms is a city. The Diet is a council. The council, the emperor was present, where Luther made his declaration. From that, it took 100 years, 120 years. Only in 1640, through Westminster Confession, conscience became a part of Western political philosophy. So Westminster Confession has a whole chapter, chapter 20, on conscience. That the government must respect the conscience of every citizen because, this is a public policy, because citizen is not a possession of the state. State doesn't own the citizen. State exists to serve the citizen. A citizen is a property of his creator. This was whole policy debate which is civilizing Europe, but it is based upon the assumption that a human being is made in God's image. He has a faculty called conscience. Conscience is not a physical organ. Therefore, atheists don't believe in conscience. There is no free press in North Korea or Venezuela or China, any atheist countries. But now England, which brought the idea of conscience, which is part of Christian metaphysics, that is theory of being. Who's a human being? If this verdict is being appealed, but supposing the Supreme Court decides against the doctor, then that's the end of Christian England. That England is no longer, its policies are not shaped by biblical worldview, which believes in conscience. So what is metaphysics? Metaphysics is the theory of being. So what we are discussing, whether you are a person, a soul, a self, that's metaphysics. The second word was?
Postmodern.
Postmodern. So modern age began with Martin Luther and the Reformations. Before that, there was medieval Europe. In Europe, there was medieval Europe. There was ancient Europe, the Greco-Roman world, barbarian world, which had no Christian influence. And then came the Middle Ages, which Europe did become Christian, but not biblical. Very much like Uganda. Uganda is Christian, but not yet biblical, because you aren't really studying the Bible as a worldview and applying it to your public policies, private life and public policy. Most of the Bible study is for your private devotional life. It's not about shaping your nation's policies. That's what Europe was. Those are called Dark Ages. But as the Bible became an open book, that began to end the Middle Ages and begin the modern world of freedom, including individual freedom, free press, economic development, free market economy, democracy, etc. All of that came. Now, once the Enlightenment picked up momentum, Enlightenment was an intellectual movement which began as a Christian movement. Most of the early Enlightenment people, particularly in Scotland, they were Christian. Some of them, what they did was, the Bible opened the Western mind. But then some people decided that we are not going to believe the Bible, we are going to believe our minds. So the emphasis shifted. The St. Augustine, 1500 years ago, and people like Martin Luther and all are Augustinian monks. St. Augustine has taught that the difference between an animal and a human being is that human being is made in God's image. What is the image of God? Mind. Mind is the supreme gift of God to us. That's what makes us different. So to be godly means to cultivate your mind. If you're going to become an innovator, a creator, you have to cultivate your mind. So Augustine wrote the curriculum of education, which was taught for 1,000 years in Europe. It was Augustinian monasteries that grew into universities. So Oxford, Cambridge, these were Augustinian monasteries. Martin Luther is an Augustinian monk. They are developing their mind. Not all the European monasteries are becoming universities, but those that are cultivating the mind, they become the universities. But then the universities are taken over by the devil, by the mistake of the philosophical mistakes the church made. So they took the modern world which the Bible began and made it into modernism, which said we're going to believe only the human mind, not God's revelation. So modernism was the last phase of modern age, where they accepted biblical values, the fruit of biblical Christianity, without the roots. Yes, all human beings are equal. How do you know? Oh, this is self-evident. This is derived from our common sense. So this became modernism. Yes, the Bible taught equality. That is what the priesthood of all believers meant. But we cut it away from the Bible. We take the fruit, not the roots, not the biblical worldview, not the faith. And then all those roots are drying up. So now you have a postmodern world which is rejecting the biblical ideas. So the fruit is dead. The human rights. This was a Bible's idea. You cut it away from Bible, the child that is born has no right because he doesn't have any soul. So if the parents decide to cut up the child's body, abort it, sell the baby parts, this is postmodern because now you're giving up the notion that the child is a human being made in God's image, precious, valuable. We exist to serve that child, not to sell that child. So postmodernism is now a philosophical movement with overt policies and practices which are destroying the world that the Bible had created. So why should a man have only one wife? You're happy with one wife, good for you. I need 4. Why can't I have 4? I'm not taking any of yours. And well, sometimes I'm attracted to women, sometimes I'm attracted to men. Why do I have to marry only one man and only one woman? Why can't I marry both a man and a woman? And why does it have to be just the 3 of us? So everything has to change because the idea that one man should have only one wife, this is not an African idea, this is not an Indian idea. This is the Bible's idea, rooted in the fact that God made one Eve for one Adam. He didn't make 70 whores in paradise. And he didn't make 4 women. He made one Eve. Through sin, through corruption, yes, the Old Testament allowed polygamy, that a brother should take his brother's widow, provide insurance to her, have children through her so that she can inherit her husband's property when her children can cultivate, etc. But that was not ideal. That was adjustment to a fallen world. The ideal was that a mature Christian should have only one wife. This was the Bible's idea. And this is a part of the policy of family, sexuality, which the Bible shaped the modern world. But the postmodern world, that sex should be limited to, in marriage, to one man, one woman in a permanent, lifelong, exclusive relationship, those ideas are gone. They're dead. They're not yet being expressed in policies, but the time is coming. Many of the European countries has already allowed Muslim men to have more than one wife. And but why should it be limited to only Muslims? Why can't Christians have many wives? Why do I have to give up my faith to have many wives? Those policies will come up and will have to change. And why does a man have to marry only a woman? Why can't he marry both a man and a woman? These are policy issues, but they're rooted in certain assumptions. And postmodernism is rebuilding a world on intellectual confusion, and therefore moral and social confusion. And the third word was?
Worldview.
Worldview. The Bible gives a view of the world, even if your pastors don't. We have a major problem that a son who cannot become a lawyer, who cannot become a businessman, you send him to theological seminary. Then he is not interested in any policy discussion. Although we are showing today that all these policies have theological foundations. But our preachers are not studying the Bible as a view of life, view of reality, view of life, which should inform. We pray God's will should be done on earth as it is done in heaven. But are we going to invent what His will is, or are we going to learn what His will is from His Word? That's a worldview. What is God's will about what marriage should be, what family should be, what divorce should be, what medicine should be, and what education should be? This is applying worldview to life so that our nations do what God desires. That's a worldview. So studying the Bible worldviewishly is the number one necessity. And this has been greatly damaged. A lot of the damage in our case came from America. The InterVarsity Press had a search the scriptures on which I was mentored, that you have a quiet time and you read a passage of the Bible, search the scripture, gave you a plan, 3-year plan on how to go through the whole Bible. But one day you're reading here, evening you're reading there, morning you're reading here, evening you're reading there. You never read the Bible as a whole, as a book to shape your worldview. You read the Bible only to shape your personal devotional Christian life. And so this problem that American Christianity had lost vision of the Bible as a God's revelation that gives us a view of reality, view of life. That is a worldview, and that is what has got to be recovered. We have to read Bible every day systematically to see its worldview and then apply it to everything.
Thank you. That's very thorough, very good. All of you who are out there teaching foundations, I think you're taking very good notes, right? Or want to show this in your course. A number of these are instructors in those foundations courses, and this is a very, very clear depiction. Now, in this country and all across Africa, all of these issues are being debated. Marriage and divorce bill reform is on the table. Proposals to liberalize abortion are on the table. Comprehensive sex education is on the table. Laws of inheritance, which get to this. Who can actually inherit property and whether equally or not? Polygamy is very live in this culture. For some reason, East Africa has held the line against homosexuality, and for what reason? The discernment seems to be that it's more a level of disgust than real grasp of metaphysics, but that's to be considered. But I know there's a lot of questions for you here, and maybe some who have specific policy issues or concerns that they'd like to take up in this framework. So let me turn it over. I'd like to see hands. Who would like to begin some discussion? Jonathan Timwebzi, one of our instructors. He's also works with the Institute for Faith Learning and Studies that we were telling you about. He'll be hosting you tomorrow, I believe.
Should he have the mic?
Yes.
Thank you so much, Dr. Larry and APC. Thank you, Professor Vishal. It's really an honor for me to listen to you for the second time. We were together last year at a conference that you were talking very deeply about the role of the church in politics. So mine is a deep, really deep question. about all this. I like the way you think and express your thoughts. I follow you on YouTube. I listen to you. I read your books. So your thoughts are fresh of breath air for me. I really like how you engage with the Christian faith. Here is my whole mess of my thoughts and my questions. I hope you are able to sieve them out at the end of the day. In terms of the philosophical contribution and how we are grappling with the deep philosophical questions, I feel that's a place that as Christians we need to engage with and find our place and relevance amidst all this. So speaking from the Western philosophical perspective, you make a lot of impression and you push me very deeply to think about the forces in the academic realm that have really shaped my thinking and all that. I remember in my classes at my graduate level, we had deep conversations about Marxism, capitalism, and all these different forces. But what was really bothering me is that I was not finding my place in terms of what is the African philosophical contribution to these kinds of things that are happening. You talk very strongly about, the forces coming from the Britain, US, the Indian worldview. But what I'm trying to grapple with is that as all these forces are coming towards Africa, what is our place in terms of our intellectual positioning as Africans and how we're thinking about these kinds of thoughts? And how do we position ourselves amidst of this, and how can we best respond in this? Do we have, even just questioning the whole African concept, what is Africa, what is African, what is African ideology, and how do we respond to these concepts, but also having a biblical foundation to how we're seeing God manifest in our African paradigms or African lines of thought, so that we can have a strategic influence or rather unique line of thoughts that we can contribute to this. I don't know whether you can give a comment to that or, but anyways, I hope you can say something to that.
Thank you. Some of the things I've said today are in this book, in the 4th chapter, the philosophical ideas that are modernism, everything that began from Descartes is dead, and now the lostness, confusion, darkness has come, and that it's not just soul that is dead, logic is dead. Without logos, logic doesn't make any sense. Language is dead. Died with 100 years ago with Wittgenstein, linguistic analysis in Cambridge philosophy. So that's 4th chapter. What is language? What is logic? What is soul? And those are the issues underlying the question of abortion, question of gender confusion, which the Western Church has collapsed. There was not a tsunami, just a mild storm of homosexuality, gay, lesbian movement, and American church had no intellectual leadership which could resist that storm coming, because seminaries are not teaching any of this, the theologians. And so American Christian leadership was totally unprepared to respond to the, let's call it tsunami for now, tsunami of homosexuality. So now about Africa, there's a chapter here called Bloodshed for Tolerance. How did the West become tolerant? And the chapter is arguing that the tolerance went to Europe from Africa. It was Tertullian, Lactantius, I can't pronounce him, Origen, Augustine. It was African intellectuals before North Africa was colonized by Islam. African theologians, intellectuals who taught tolerance. So Emperor Constantine actually hired Lactantius, who was an African theologian, to read his own books to the emperor, which opened the emperor to the idea that the state should be tolerant towards Christians, and the church was legalized, Christianity was legalized, and then later made exclusive religion. But Europe becoming tolerant is a massive contribution that African intellectuals made to Europe. That chapter is here. So instead of going more into detail, I would answer your question that Africa has already contributed some of the most important things to the West. We lost it along the way. It's now your job to recover, and instead of just receiving from the West or the East, you begin to give the light. Just read the first 10, 15 pages of that chapter on bloodshed for martyrdom to help you recover the African self-esteem, the intellectual strength of the African church. Thank you.
Don't fail to introduce yourself, please.
Yes, thank you so much, Doctor. I'm called Eliabu Ichiriza, and also I teach here. My question also is in line with Jonathan's. What can make us think that the church or Christianity is the best force against Western ideas of socialism? Because over years, we have seen the church being more influenced by society than the opposite. In fact, in Africa, we see the church is the medium of Western culture through singing and worship style, language. The church is at the forefront of bringing the Western cultures. Why can't we think of our African cultures and traditions to be the best wall against secularism and Western forces? For example, Uganda's position against homosexuality, I don't think it is, well, it is inspired by Christianity, but not really grounded by in Christianity. So why can't we think of reintegrating African ethnic even beliefs as a force against the wave of Western secularism?
Yeah. Well, the simple truth is that the West is lost and confused now. It was the most powerful civilization for the last 500, 600 years, 700 years. And those who followed Christ, the Americans, Europeans, they came here and they blessed us. They blessed Uganda. But right now, Christianity is at a very low ebb. Some of the best, strongest, largest churches in Europe are African churches, led by Africans. So you are already producing Christian leaders who are going, whether to Kyiv or to London or to any of these countries, and building up the largest churches. There is no reason why you cannot also be producing the thinkers who will speak into the confusion and the lostness of Western philosophy, theology, science, and sociology and history, and you will give guidance and light. So there's no reason why the new Reformation cannot begin here in Uganda.
Can I jump in and tease this out a bit? Because I know at least these two and some others here can help with this dialogue. So let's take the question that he raised earlier, that clearly, biblically, the concept of conscience is there. So what do you as an African say to that notion? Where do we go to explore and perhaps find within your experience, your culture, a notion of conscience? Does that exist? And can we tease that out? Can we perhaps develop that as Africans? And you might want to go in the direction of what you often describe as Ubuntu or collective commitments that help shape and form individuals. I think one aspect in the West is that it's a very individualistic notion. And what happened over time was freedom of conscience became autonomy and became the right to choose based on whatever I perceive versus participation in something larger, which I believe would be a more biblical notion of conscience. I don't know, Eliab or Jonathan or, Professor Martin Chizito would like to address this particular one. Yeah, take this one to Martin.
Yes, thank you very much, Doctor. My name is Martin Chizito. I have followed the presentation very well. It's very touching, very inspiring, and really worth reflecting on for quite a long time. I think I'll keep reflecting on many of the things that you have said. But just to try to respond to the issue, at hand, the African response to this kind of what is going on, as we have had. I think right from the beginning, the Africans realized that an individual is extremely weak. And this idea of culture and the social construction of who an individual is was probably aimed at creating a powerful force that can protect this individual in society where he belongs. So they try to create what they think is socially acceptable and probably defend and protect this weak individual who cannot single-handedly make maximum use of what we call the conscious now against the forces that are encountering that individual. And I'm saying that because it also touches one of the statements that you made, which I've continued to reflect on as the presentation went on. And it said, as man, you are born with everything, right? And you can create yourself and not allow society or culture to define you. And I was trying to reflect, when we have been facing this powerful force of lesbianism and homosexuality from the West, what has actually helped us stand and attempt to resist it has been two things. One has been the culture. This is outside our cultural context. Two has been the Christianity. And this is what has collectively held us together as a fiber in Uganda to say no against some of these practices. Concluding on that, I have also been looking at our audience here, and I've been thinking, we've had all this, and at the end of the day, it comes to an individual to make a decision. But the forces behind these gender policies are overwhelmingly powerful. They are driving policies that come from the global West, driven through the rights-based approach to development. You have a right to this, you have a right to that. Everything has zeroed down on rights. And all these other agents that promote this kind of, this philosophy or this worldview. Of course, through globalization, we see a number of these civil society, international civil society organizations coming down here. We see our own governments taking on some of these policies, of course, from the global world. We know through the conditions for getting donor funding, and they're taken on. And we see, of course, other agents, including the church itself. Because today what we seem to see is that actually, I think it has been a historical kind of, that the church and the state have tended to work together. And the church, even here in Africa, has always tried to be very careful not to antagonize the state because of how the state has been known to be mighty in Africa, that it can crush everything. So I've been thinking in this audience, how can we face and engage all these mighty forces that are really trying to promote this kind of philosophy that we are looking at today? Thank you.
Jordan and then Reverend.
Hi everyone, I'm called to Esime Jordan McGurran. I work for Africa Policy Center, Uganda Partners, and Center for Global Engagement. So I first have a few comments and I have one question. First comment, I'm wondering Ethiopians, the Ethiopian Tewahedo Church, they have indigenous philosophy that you might call African. If you think Ethiopians are African, of course, depending on how we define what Africa is, you get. Also, Ethiopians are a Christian group that are they didn't bring Western Christianity. Just because Ugandan Christianity is mostly Western, you got it from colonialists, you get. Christianity on the continent in Ethiopia was not colonialist, which it might be unique. Of course, Ethiopia was not colonized as well. So Ethiopians are one place to consider about what African Christianity looks like when it's not colonialist. And also they have a long tradition of intellectual formation as indigenous African peoples, especially in the monasteries. Another comment, I'm confused this idea that, or maybe we say African or Ugandan cultures, that they're a bulwark or a defense against homosexuality. Because in fact, if you look at the literature, even in Uganda, especially, I know most among the Baganda, homosexuality existed, you know? Men were having sex with other men, and sometimes, maybe women too, but men, seemingly from the record, we know that it happened among men. Usually it's more quiet about women than men are more, in the record, people know more about them. So that's what I just wonder. I think the opposition is mostly from Christianity. That's my opinion. But I think Uganda needs to wrestle with, in some of the indigenous cultures in Uganda, homosexuality was there, you get. So now what do we do in this contemporary time as Christians if we want to both draw on being indigenous and being Christian but not being Western? Like, how do we put them all together? Anyways, my question for you, there's some cultures in the world, especially some in India that are known, and some in native North America, and also some in South America, that people that we might call now transgender, that we might use that word, those people existed in the context. Some people like that, usually as a certain group. Sometimes a third gender, sometimes however they might call themselves. Usually they had their own categories. Seemingly they fit somehow in the society, and seemingly they had an okay life, a life similar to other people. So if that's the case, what do we do as Christians who usually do want people's dignity to be respected? We want people to have seemingly a good life somehow. But when there were societies before Christianity came that usually had such people, and they were okay, they had their good life. But then sometimes when Christianity did came through missionaries or colonialism or whatever, sometimes these people, at least they say they experienced violence, because they were transgender or whatever term they may call themselves. They had a good life, but then Christianity comes and they were experiencing violence for some reason. So what do we do when societies had these people? They were okay, life was okay, but then as Christians, how do we talk about them? Or how do we talk about that experience? What should they do? Should they change? Should they continue in the way they're living? So that's my question for you.
You want to take one more and then address? Sure.
I must thank Dr. Lawrence for actually bringing me to this.
I found him out there and brought him in.
Ready for here because I wasn't aware. Also, thank you for the presentation.
Reverend, please tell us your name.
I am Reverend Rick Sam Isaac from the Diocese of Lano. I have a motivation from your presentation. The two individuals whom you gave their cases, one the doctor, and the other person who was asked to present a verdict, the other lady. Okay. If I try to relate their operations within the policy, they did not sit to formulate the policies. They were working within the formulated policies, but they chose to do it differently. That means at this stage, we who are gathered here, who have been challenged by this presentation, are operating within policies that have already been set by those whose intentions were hidden. It begins with me, who is here. How am I going to operate within that policy settings? What difference am I going to pull out before I have an opportunity, if I may, to sit in the formulation process of a policy? And remember, in the process of formulation of a policy, I may be the only one whose intention is clear against 100 or 1,000. So, operating within the policy with a difference is my choice. Number one, because I may not have time to sit in the formulation. Question. Okay, maybe another encouragement. When we talk about church, what is the church doing? We are at Uganda Christian University Mukono, which is a arm of the church. As a student, as a professor, as a staff, am I forgetting that I am church? I'm operating in the church. So what am I doing? If I talk about church, whom am I looking at? Is it the Archbishop? Is it who? Let it start with me before we see the picture that is bigger than I can reach. So what can we do? In this case, Uganda Christian University Mukono, to have this kind of information reach other people. I have sat here only once. I may have no opportunity to sit. Many of the things are coming so new and yet challenging. How can I have opportunity to better my understanding in this matter so that I can go out and make a good representation? Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for those very helpful comments and questions. The two about individualism, which you also had a comment. But let me begin with a short answer to your question. Jesus acknowledges that some people are born eunuchs, some are made eunuchs by society, and some have chosen to be eunuchs for the kingdom of God. So what do we do in India with the eunuchs community? Most of India, actually Hindu India, Muslim India, despises them. But our university, our vice chancellor, he made a policy a long time ago that on Christmas, they go as a group, the eunuchs, dancing, collecting money. The baby is born or marriage is happening, they go there. So he would always invite them into his home, offer them Christmas cake, tea, coffee, talk to them as human beings, and respect them. And this is important that we cultivate that respect for every human being. Now, do we say that if someone is born with a gender confusion, that is normal? Well, I'm born with diabetic genes, inherited it from my father, possibly also from my mother's side. I have to accept that I'm diabetic. That's how I'm born. Everybody is born with some deformity in the fallen world. But do I really want my children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren to receive the same deformity? Or should I support research that makes sure that with a generation, these deformed genes are not passed on? So to say that I received deformed genes from my parents isn't meant to insult them or insult me. But this is not what God created, diabetic genes, whatever appropriate word is. So can it be changed? Should it be changed? Or yes, so God created man in his image, male and female. Some are born confused because of whatever reason, and we must respect them, love them, honor them. But it doesn't mean that God didn't create man, male and female, and that abnormality should be accepted as normal. Anyone born with abnormality should be respected. But we don't have to be confused that this is all evolutionary accident. But the important issue is the individual. See, all the reformations in Europe began with individuals in a university. So Wycliffe was in Oxford, Jan Hus was in Prague, universities. Luther was in Wittenberg University. So the university provided the intellectual, the support environment. And I was saying this afternoon that once Pope was rejected, Pope had two functions. He was the infallible voice of God, Pope in council, and he was the executive head of the church over the bishops and universities, everything else. Lutheranism split the two roles. In many of the German states where there was a nobility ruling, the prince became the head of the German church. But there were many cities, such as Geneva or Bern or Basel, which were republican cities. So cities were republic. There the city chose its own leadership. So some places bishops were the head of the city. Monasteries, abbeys were running the cities. And so there were different arrangements, but generally majority of the Lutheran cities, Lutheran states, provinces, kingdoms, the prince became the executive head of the church, figurehead. He appointed the bishops, etc. He oversaw. But the infallible voice of the Lord, which was no longer infallible, university became the voice of, the Protestant university became the voice of God, because the professors were able to hold each other accountable, each other's interpretation of the Bible accountable. Luther's translation was carefully investigated by other scholars who, he didn't know Greek. He learned Greek from his junior professor Philip Melanchthon, and then he taught himself Hebrew because there was no Hebrew teacher in the University of Wittenberg. So university became the voice of God, what popes used to do. What is truth? What does the Bible teach on this issue? So this policy institute is very important because what you're doing is learning how to apply God's truth to a particular issue. Now, your voice will not necessarily be heard tomorrow by the state, but you're learning to become those who will shape Uganda's future policies. But the significance of an individual, it was 1841 when individualism began to be secularized and created today's problem. So individualism is one of the Bible's greatest gifts to Western civilization. Science grows when an individual says, my professors are wrong. All the university's professors are wrong. This is the truth. Then everybody hates him, denies funding to him. But eventually, if he stands his ground and proves that he is actually right, then everybody begins to support him and gives him Nobel Prize, etc. So confidence in the individual. That's what Luther is doing. So Martin Luther, the father of your pioneer of Protestant Reformation, is an individualist. That I'm not going to accept what the popes have said, what the church council have said, what the emperor has said, because my conscience is captive to the word of God. That begins theological and philosophical and sociological, political revolutions when an individual is committed to live under God. And why is he an individual? Because Paul is an individualist. Paul says, I'm dead to the world is dead to me. Jesus is an individualist. Abraham is an individualist. God calls a person, you forget your father's land, forget your culture, you walk with me. But you walk with me, I will take you to heaven. That's not what God says. God says, you walk with me, follow me, I will make you a great nation. Because through you, I want to bless all the nations. So, biblical individualism is opposite of secularized individualism. So what secularism, modern age becoming modernism, what it did was it took all the biblical ideas, cut them from God's revelation and the Bible, secularized them, corrupted them. So how secularized individualism was born was in 1841, Ralph Waldo Emerson, a transcendentalist philosopher, a young man, gave a series of lectures. He loved his wife. She was 19 when she died of tuberculosis. And as he saw her dying, he was really shaken up and began to think deeply, profusely, sharply about life and reality. Then he gave a series of lectures in the Masonic Lodge. They were published. His lecture on individualism was published as Self-Reliance. For more than 100 years, the lecture was quoted left, right, and center, part of American literature, because it is a brilliant lecture. His models of individualism are Moses, Plato, and Paul. Milton, John Milton. These are models. But he goes so far as to say that you shouldn't worship in the church, because then you will begin to think and talk like your pastor and elders. You should be silent, listen to your own inner voice, then you will be a true individualist. So what happens with this individualism, which is taken from the Bible, modern age becoming modernism, which has ended into postmodernism. But the difference was, in Christ, individualism was an individual dedicating himself to God, surrendering himself to God in such a radical way that you take my life, cut my body, shed my blood, so that others might have life. I dedicate myself to God, for my body to be broken, for my blood to be shed, to bless the world. I don't live for myself, I live for God. I surrender myself to God so that he might take me and he might bless the world through me. That's biblical individualism. Secularized individualism is opposite, that, oh, my girlfriend got pregnant or my wife got pregnant and I don't want the inconvenience of having this baby. I would rather kill this baby because this relationship I have with my girlfriend or my wife is for me, for my advantage, not to give me inconvenience. So I make no sacrifices for anyone. I sacrifice my children for myself. So everything exists for me. I'm the center of my universe. Jesus came for me, didn't he? Church exists for me. If this church music is boring or the pastor is boring or I don't like one of the elders, I quit. Everything is for me. These relationships are for me. Now, we'll pursue this on Wednesday when we talk about parenting and family a bit. As an individual, I'm God's image. But I become more of God's image when I choose to love my wife and become one with her. When two of us become three, have a baby, That's when I become more of God's image. Because when God is making man in his image, he's making male and female, for two of them to be one flesh, to become three. So the idea that I as an individual am God's image is only half truth, and it actually becomes corruption of biblical Christianity, because family is God's image, because he is triune. How does it make me God's image? 2 o'clock in the morning, my wife says, you get up and change the diaper, because she has already fed the baby twice. I haven't heard the baby crying. I'm fast asleep. But when I choose to obey my wife, get up and change the diaper, then I understand the father heart of God, the mother heart of God. I become more like God, sacrificing myself, my sleep, my comfort for my wife, for my baby. So this idea of God as an individualist is a Unitarian idea. God is a Trinity. He makes man in his image, male and female, for them to have children, because only through the family, through parenting, as we will discuss on Wednesday, we establish our dominion over this earth. So yes, polygamy is a problem in Africa, but that is why Africa has not produced rulers who will establish their dominion over Africa, because it is family through which human beings establish their sovereignty over this earth. But we'll continue that.
Thank you.